How deep do deep fakes need to be to trick employees? Well, stay tuned and you'll learn this and much more in the next 60 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the live Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, the best part of your security week. Brought to you by ClickArmor, the first interactive security awareness training, assessment, and engagement platform. Today is session 38 on Wednesday, February 21st, 2024, and today we're talking about how deep do deep fakes need to be to trick your employees. I did not create the title. I believe Scott created the title just to hear me say it over and
That's
over
right.
today.
Yeah. Not only is it not easy to say, I even made a typo in creating the title on Zoom, I think. Somebody pointed that out to me.
Well, I'm Ryan from ClickArmor. I'll be your host today. We've got a fantastic panel as well, which I'll introduce momentarily. For those who haven't attended before, just a few housekeeping details before we start. We'd like attendees to type into the chat where they're joining us from around the world. It's great to see the international participation we have as forums continue to go on. While you're doing that, I just wanted to remind everyone that this session is brought to you by ClickArmor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on today. And also, as the session unfolds, please use the chat for any questions you have for the panel or resources you'd like to share with the group. I know Scott mentioned if you've got any deepfake examples or things that you'd want us all to learn about, please feel free to share it in the chat. If you want to network and meet some new folks as well, again, use the chat for that. And just a reminder, if you do need CPE credits, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll be able to send those over just as a reminder. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome George to the panel. It's his first time here. George is a technology strategist who speaks frequently on the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. He's been called upon to brief U.S. Cyber Command and the Congressional Cyber Caucus on the mechanics of disinformation and influence operations. So thank you, George, and welcome to your first panel.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next up, we've got Bec. She's a chartered psychologist with 20 years of experience in researching and evaluating human performance in the defense and security sector. The knowledge and insights gained from this research give her a unique perspective on the ways humans behave when working in complex, uncertain, and ambiguous environments, such as cybersecurity. So welcome back, Bec. It is great to have you again.
Thank you.
And we have next, Thea is a behavioral neuroscientist with over 10 years of experience in studying how the biology of our brains can influence our behavior. In her current role as Director of Research for Praxis Security Labs, Thea now works on applying her experience to cybersecurity scenarios surrounding the human element. Great to see you again, Thea.
Nice to see you. Hi.
And next, we've got Fletus, who is a seasoned IT and security professional, currently a security ops manager. Beyond his expertise, he finds immense joy in sharing his passion for cybersecurity with others. It's always great to have you back, Fletus. Thank you for joining us.
A pleasure to be here.
And we also have Scott Wright, founder and CEO of ClickArmor, joining us today on the panel. Scott, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you, Ryan.
And I'm Ryan from ClickArmor, and without further ado, let's figure out what deepfakes are. Also, just to, before we do jump into that, I always just like to talk about, the session is recorded and what do we do with those recordings? Here are the resources. We do post the full session on YouTube. We're also extracting each session's highlights and transcripts, and we send them out on a quarterly basis as a CISO report on security awareness. If anyone's ever interested in reading or reviewing one of those, we've got them. Just reach out and we can send you that content.
It's in the QR code. They can actually download.
Oh, it's right there. Yep. So perfect. Yep.
If you trust QR codes.
Yeah, if you trust QR codes. Or I can mail you a copy as well. If you'd rather have a paper version, I will be happy to do that. But yeah, so we record all this content, we break it down, YouTube shorts, all kinds of different videos. You can look for it on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So what are deepfakes? So, deepfakes are AI-generated videos, images, and audio that digitally manipulate the appearance, voice, or actions, of real people. They can be used for various purposes, such as entertainment, education, and malicious deception, mostly what we're talking about today. And I just had this, brief little chart showing the increase of deepfake videos, and it's just alarming to me. But I mean, that's also, the pace of the internet, the pace of technology, and the pace of development. But, you can see it was barely a thing in 2019, and here we are just mere years later, and it's in the news every week.
It's an amazing graphic.
Yeah, it's a shocking graphic too.
Yeah,
and to see what 2024 and beyond kind of brings now that we have new emerging technologies, and computers are only getting faster and more advanced. So then we talk about, okay, well, deepfake in the news. It's been in front of our faces, left, right, and center lately. About a year ago, it was all of a sudden it was ChatGPT was all the hype, and that has like slowly led us down this path of now deepfakes are a actual severe attack vector. And so obviously, the big one, finance worker pays out 25 million, after a video call deepfaked CFO. And we're going to hear about this one for quite a while. And at Fletus, we've talked about this before with deep fakes and having those passwords and those different ways to kind of get around it, because now it's happened, and all the things we were talking about and saying that could theoretically happen, it just happened. That fake Zoom call just lost a company 25 million. And then now we're going to see more articles like this from Howard Solomon in Canada, how to defend against the organization against deepfake. So people are paying attention. So now that's why we're having this forum again, to bring it back, the awareness up front, so we can talk about it, and hopefully you guys can all take something back, that you've learned today, and be prepared for this next wave of attack. And then there's the emerging threats from deepfakes. And then this is where we see, OpenAI's new Sora. This is just brand new, that, within the last week or so being announced, where now with just a few commands, you can actually get video content back. So, this is almost, this is just the preview of what's going to come, but now entire meetings could be constructed via just, chat commands, and videos could be, populated anywhere. We're going into an election year in the United States. We're already in one, and the deep fakes in elections. You're going to see the misinformation, and is something George is an expert about, of these videos and ways that social media is used to drive results. And again, we're going to have to look at that in Canada as we go through election cycles, and that applies to every country that's represented here. So emerging threats is something that we definitely have to kind of pay attention to. And I see, Fletus is dropping some links. That's awesome. Thank you very much. So I'll turn it over to the panel now. Just with kind of the news stories there and some of the emerging threats, just love to hear your feedback and your thoughts. Or are you terrified? Is this hype and FUD? How should we kind of look at this, and how should we kind of prepare our workforces for it?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start, Ryan. Just I think the graphics and the context that you've created here are really excellent. It really sheds a light on the kinds of creative scenarios that we're going to start to see. I think it's sort of, sometimes people have a simple idea of what this might look like. You've seen maybe a deep fake version of the Queen of England giving her Christmas address. It's all fun. But when you start to see these kinds of things, like the $25 million breach and robocalls and things like that, it's really interesting to see how these are going to get used. But I think it's going to have a huge impact on politics at elections, with disinformation and things like that. So I think we're going to have to spend a little more effort and time on this stuff in the next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Fletus, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so just to pull it back a little bit, I think it's just to continue to put policies administrative in place and to help your users understand. I'll share a little bit later how I'm going to contradict myself, but I'm going to start with this right now. There's going to be mannerisms that you can pick up on. My boss doesn't use this terminology. There's hand movements that this person never does. There's going to be different types of mannerisms to the way you speak, like the way I'm using my hands now, my eyebrows, my eye contact with you. And in a little while, I'll share some stuff that I'm working on that it's going to contradict what I'm saying right now. But in general, this is ways that you can get around that. And to Ryan's point, when we did a session with this, I think it was just over a year ago, is pre-sharing authentication mechanisms. Like, I'm going to talk about a chocolate milkshake today. I told Ryan before this call to verify it's me, as I'm going to mention a chocolate milkshake at some point and make it fluid. Like, I enjoyed that chocolate milkshake for lunch today. No one else on the call knows that, but I just authenticated myself with Ryan. I'd have to have an authentication with every single panelist, which gets very tricky, and that's just gets into key pairs. Using multi-factor, two-factor is going to get very hard if we have to teach our users to do that. So we're going to have to teach them other ways around how do you get past the false information or trusting everything you see. So,
yeah, absolutely great points, George.
Yeah, I think we need to back up 1 second here, right? So the first sort of voice clone attack was 2019, and they took someone for 234,000. And then we get up to real-time video, which is what that most recent headline was. And that capability was only demonstrated in theory at DEF CON last August. So the rate of improvement with off-the-shelf models is exponential. But to the point about cyber's fascination with deepfakes is to understand that the workforce is going to be encountering these well outside of work environments, right? We are fully in the era that I call synthetic reality. And I think it really touched home for me when local sheriff's departments started warning small towns about virtual kidnappings, right? So these are voice clones using stripped audio off of your daughter or your son's Instagram video or Snapchat video, trained to sound like they're in distress. I mean, if that is what they're facing outside of work, it's extremely good to meet them, I think, at that place, because if you can prime them there, then it makes it less abstract. Like this is only a threat vector facing you in the workplace. And you begin to prime a lot of the critical thinking skills and skepticism that you need to then, I think, put, as Fletus said, policies in place and things like either passphrases or even just like ironclad policies like we do not do financial transactions over Zoom calls or phone. But you can only walk them to that, I think, if you meet them where the real threat and the fear is, which is also outside the workplace.
Yeah, especially when, you know, these scams are hitting seniors at a high alarming rate as well, where they're, you know, you think seniors believe they're getting a phone call from a son or daughter or family member, and
Yes.
it's been an emergency, and
yeah,
they've
several
been
months
trained.
ago, I used 11 Labs, which is the same tool that was used to make the Biden robocall in New Hampshire, to clone my voice so I could show my parents the verisimilitude. Like I wanted them to hear like this is not me. And if I hadn't primed them for that, it probably would have been hard for them to understand that just at face value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best way to do it is with an example of it. Thea.
Yeah, so I really resonate with what George said. So it's actually, if you test this even on yourself, if you've primed yourself to know that this video is a deep fake, actually at the current level it is, you can probably spot it that somebody's got an extra finger or somebody's got an ear hanging out, that you would normally, your brain will filter that information normally because it's like, well, that's ridiculous. But if you're primed, that's good. The expectation that people can be primed all the time is not possible. This is not possible. And I think one thing that might be more useful to the industry at the moment is that we tend to we react on the attack vector because this is what we do in technology. So it was how do we teach people about phishing emails, and then vishing, and then it was smishing, and now it's deepfake. And it's like, actually, what is the common thread between all of these things is social manipulation. How do you guard people against being manipulated? Very, very difficult to do, but there are certainly things that we can put in place to get people to notice certain social manipulation tactics and maybe be a little bit more aware of those. So I think if we had a little bit more of a shift towards that, you would protect yourself against multiple attack vectors rather than just this is against phishing, this is against deepfakes, this is against, you know, social manipulation really is the active ingredient in everything.
It's very true. And we've just kind of been stacking these different attack vectors on top of the one common problem for years, which is, you know, which we've talked about a lot on this, on the forum, which is, you know, social engineering and that attack type. Bec, I'll give you the last kind of comment, and then we'll jump into our first poll. Oh.
On mute, yeah. It was just really to build a little bit on what Thea said there, because what sprang into my mind as she was talking was this thing about cognitive biases. You know, we've had all this conversation before, but it's also the latest threat that's in the news is the one that has our focus and our attention, and the actual level and likelihood of that threat may be completely different. So I think sometimes it's very easy to jump on it and think, right, we need to have this, some training, we need to build awareness. But actually, as George said there, is it really that much of a threat? How far advanced is it? But it's quite easy for us to get a little bit carried away with that. Having said that, it doesn't hurt to start thinking about it early on either. And as it's in its infancy and we're starting to learn about it, then now is the time to start that slow process, raising people's awareness. to
Yeah,
it.
because I think it's a lot easier to try and, get people to be aware and train them on something before it's a problem, before it's because if it's all of a sudden after a breach, right? We know how the mind is completely different. You're reacting, you're not necessarily planning, so you're taking in that information differently. So yeah, it might be early, but I think it's better. It's better that we start incorporating the conversation now,
Yeah.
than let it sneak up on us and all of a sudden be an overwhelming issue.
Yeah, I think that's an important message for like all the security managers here to be giving to their executives, right? To the chief information security officer. It's not too early to start sensitizing people to this stuff.
Yeah, and that's why I called it emerging threats, and it's something that we always kind of have to pay attention to. Yes, we can talk about what's attacking our people now, but we really need to be prepared for what's next, so we can start as an industry build the plan and the framework to get there. So we're never reacting; we're always kind of being proactive. So that being said, let's jump into our first poll. Actually, I'll share this here. Scott's going to launch it for me. Perfect, thank you. Let's have a series of poll questions. First one: have you ever encountered a deepfake online? Options: yes, more than once. No, I don't know. Maybe just you don't pay attention. And if you've got any good ones or good examples of ones, just love to share them in the chat. And speaking of chat, while everyone's voting away there, just to kind of review where everyone has joined us from today. So we've got North Carolina and Ottawa, Mount Forest, Ontario. Excellent. Toronto. Thank you very much, Toronto. Ice cold Saskatoon. Well, that might compete with ice cold Oslo, Norway. I think you guys should probably compare temperature notes today based on the fire raging behind Thea. It's probably not warm out. We've got Jacksonville, Florida. We've got Montreal, Canada. Hello from Philly. Hello to Philly. Turkey, Istanbul. We've been dreaming about visiting Turkey. So you're very lucky to live in that part of the world. Dubai, that's awesome. We got Mount Forest again, Montreal again, and I think that's it. So thank you again, as always, for everyone joining us from such international warm and cold destinations. Okay, well, I think first poll has wrapped up there. I think I'm just going to jump into kind of our first topic of conversation, so to speak, even though we've been deep into a great conversation so far. So which news stories best illustrates the most likely risk to employees being targeted with deepfakes, right? We know that, the number one is big financial one, but that's not a common one. Well, what's going to be that common kind of news story that we could use as a learning moment to kind of Bec's point, now to start priming everyone. Let's, getting them warmed up. So I'll open this up to the panelists if you've got any ideas on what would be an appropriate one. Scott, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, sure. I actually don't have a specific one as far as employees go. I think the ones that were in the news recently are really interesting from, an education and awareness point of view. But as George actually said, the first deepfake voicemails and audio that's been used for just tricking people into believing that somebody else is calling and leaving a message is a generally still very illustrative type of attack. So the more we can show people these are actually commonly being used now, and tie the news stories directly to people's relevant context. So that's my quick take on it. I don't have a specific story, but I think all of the ones that are around the deepfake audios being used as a voicemail are probably one of the most compelling ones.
Yeah, I think about a few things that has come out around executive admins or the assistants that have been tricked by deepfakes. Like, I think it was a 90-minute or 60 minutes episode, I think in 22 or 23, it was put out by a social engineering firm of like, they showed how easy it is to know that this person's going to be traveling, they're going to be on site, and then to spoof them to call their executive, hey, I lost my passport. Can you transfer me a copy of it, or can you send me this information? Now you've got PI that's freely given because they are able to use enough context because of either social media. They have to share where they're at. Like, you have to publicize that you're on site. If you're a newscaster or you're giving a speech somewhere, that person markets you. They share that you're there. So there's enough recon that happens, and it's easy to call and say, hey, I lost my bag, or my bag got lost in transit. Can you share this information with me? And people are likely to do it. I mean, that's where you have to like get back to that childhood thing of like, what I tell my kids, what my parents told me is, if I ever send someone to pick you up, this is our safe word. Like, find ways to verify with that close proximity who has access to all of your information. So if you've got an executive admin, this is for your executives listening. How do you verify, or how does your admin verify you? So that you can easily have that trust. Same with your partner, same with your kids, like find ways to build that credibility so that you can't trick. Because George's point, I've played with these too, and I've shared samples. It's concerning how easy it is to make it look. And as I alluded earlier, I'm helping a training company right now where they're programmatically studying me so they can make me look, and they can program my fingers moving. They can program my emotions because they've studied my video. They can programmatically make it look like me now. So I said I was going to contradict myself. That's what they're doing now when they build training modules. They can make it look like Fletus. Fletus rocks. So let me add a rock every 15 seconds. Fletus likes to squat. Fletus blinks heavily. They program those into their training modules. This is training material. Think about that. This is companies building training material to make it look more human.
Yeah, to the thing about the passphrase, what's very funny is we're enamored with the dangers of new technology, but like passphrases are like Cold War encrypted telephone line technology, right? Like, I mean, they've been in use since World War II, so there are processes to verify identities. But I think outside of the news, it's mostly been wire transfers attacking businesses. I would also think anyone trying to escalate privileges. I've lost my password. Can you send me an MFA code? And I've got a SIM swap in for that. You know, I think we've already seen them attacking contractors and attacking personnel that are sort of outside the fence to try and it would be more compelling with a voice than a video. But I think I'm going to still harp on the news story that I'm going to put in the chat here, which is I think if you can connect with employees on something that is very personal to them, like if everyday parents can be attacked using this technology, that's how prevalent it is, right? These are commodified tools that get cheaper by the day, that are run by organized crime groups that do not have necessarily sophisticated IT operations. They're just using off-the-shelf classifiers, and they've got some whiz kid who's built some automations, probably through Zapier. But that is to say that, like, if this can hit you and you have nothing to do with accounts payable, you are not in HR or whatever, like, I think making them aware and maybe go so far as to like not necessarily start quizzing people. Like Thea said, if you just start stacking like this checklist of things that everyone has to like keep in mind, one, it's impossible. Like the human mind cannot do that. And then two, like just start with like maybe some just general education, like here, I am security. I'm here to help you understand threats that are outside of work, because no one wants to take another security quiz and they don't want to be subjected to training. I would say it's, you know, security does not have the best reputation when it comes to that sort of thing. But if you could start to meet people like, hey, I'm just going to teach you about this thing so you can go home and tell your parents, so that you are adding value to their life. You're again turning them on to the idea that these are very easy to deploy. Again, in 2019, it was novel. It is like fully here now, and it's hitting, you know,
it's almost commercialized. It's
mom and pop, you know, parents basically.
Yeah. But I just posted a story, you know, out of Canada as well. Seniors taken for a few $100,000 with AI voice cloning, right? I think it's a great point that George makes. Like, arm people with real life stories that are actually happening and are capable of happening to anyone, and that will give them more of that context and that understanding that I better pay attention in the broader scope of things. I should, you know, maybe start putting a different lens on things, and we can't just believe everything you know, at face value. And so that kind of launches me into our next poll question, which I'll share here so we can see it as it launches. And do you consider the authenticity and credibility of the online content you consume or share? And so you know, as the polls underway, I'd love to hear from the panel about, you know, what are your thoughts on this? You know, how do you consider the content you share, and maybe at what point did you start paying attention more? Because, you know, we've all likely, you know, been at some point in our lives where we've just like, wait a second, you know, and you start to rein back, and you maybe not share the same that you used to. So anyone like to go first, Bec?
Yeah, sure. I think Thea may well relate to this, but having an academic background, it's something that I've been taught with all of my academic qualifications right from the very start. Is it credible? And this is going back, you know, 20 plus years now, about building references and all of that sort of thing. So go and check where your information is coming from. The one thing that I then learnt from that was to start checking websites. Where is this from? Is it just any old bod, or is it got some sort of credibility behind it? Is it a .org? Is it a .ac.uk for us here in the UK? I think from my perspective, what would concern me is, what do I need to check now? Because everything that I've been taught about critical thinking was from before these threats started to hit home. So I'm aware that I've got to upgrade and update the way that I see life and the way that I view things. And that to me is a little bit on the scary side, because it's just changed so much beyond recognition, I think, over the last decade or so. And I just, even if you like to think you're aware, we're perhaps not. I was reading a piece of research a couple of weeks ago that said, another cognitive bias, we're always more confident that we can catch these things than we actually can be. And I'm feeling a little bit of conscious incompetence, I think the phrase is at the minute, that it could well catch me. But that's just my take on it.
Excellent. I believe, was it Fletus next?
It's fine. I'll keep it brief. It's similar to Bec. It's just understanding who I'm seeing it from. I sent some false information last week, so I can just say that, like, I had a very trusted person who shared it with me, and as I dug deeper into the article, I realized it was just not enough. Even though it was on a credible site, journalists made a mistake. It was just enough that if I would have spent a few extra minutes and tried to cross-reference it, to Bec's point, I probably could have figured out that this was an opinion versus a fact. There was still some good meat in the article. It just wasn't fully factual. So I think that's where I have to get comfortable cross-referencing. But to be honest, every article has an agenda now. So, like, news isn't news. So we have to be very careful what the agenda is being pushed, because not to go political, you have to be careful, because there are going to be people who use their articles and their websites, et cetera, for agendas. So understanding the agenda that's being pushed by the site, and then be able to cross-reference it with your social media. So like an X or another well-known education firm. So like an EDU, is there a paper on this? Has someone put out a white paper recently, or a journal that's a journal article that has legitimate citations, not just a tweet, not just a Medium post that someone just crafted in 20 minutes with AI. So.
Very great points, George.
Yeah, I mean, studying St. Petersburg operations will teach you to think twice before clicking on anything. But I've tried to do very small things in my own world. Like, I don't know if anyone sees me post on LinkedIn, I will always put 100% human written at the bottom, and I will verify that I have in fact read the content before I have shared it. I know that's a step too far. I think when we are trying to be empathetic with the users that we're trying to train, we have all collectively lived in the dopamine fever dream that is social media. So we've all sort of gotten inured to a certain pattern of behavior of click share. And I think, that happens. That's why we click on links we shouldn't. That's why we share things we shouldn't. But I think now if you just operate on a baseline assumption that we're kind of in synthetic reality, it does create moments of pause. And it's just that pause that helps you to stop clicking on things you shouldn't. But you really have to create that pause. And I think you have to, I want security people to really empathize with how easy it is to get emotionally wrapped up in things, because we are at the edge of this, and we like live with debates around deep fakes, but people in HR or ops who are just trying to do their jobs, like that's not where they live, and you have to meet them there.
Yeah, before Thea goes real quick, that's something like I opened up, I think I fell for that. So being able to put yourself back into their shoes when you're sharing these stories is, I fell fault as your security leader, as a security practitioner in your org, or in my case, as a parent, as a son, as a father. I have failed. You can fail too. Like, let's fail together. Like, understanding that their failure is going to happen, but it's really how you respond. It's how do we respond from it? What did we learn? It's the human-centric side of security that I've preached numerous times on here. Is it the school of hard knocks? Is it formal education? Or is it just your wit and your desire to learn and to develop those skill sets?
Yeah, so yeah, I completely agree with what everybody said. I think a point that I would really like to make about what everybody said is that we're asking us, I mean, we're in this industry, right? We're very conscious all the time because this is what we do all the time. And yet we're still like, could I tell if that was fake? Sometimes we know we're tired, we've clicked on things we shouldn't, etc. One thing that we're going to have to appreciate, I think, at some point is a reduction in productivity to allow space for people time to think about what they're actually clicking on. Is this legitimate? Is it not? And this is causing huge friction at the moment because managers are not understanding things are going to slow down a little bit if you want people to consider security measures now, because as we said, it's about social manipulation and it requires a huge amount of brain energy to notice. So we also have to think about giving people that so that we are allowed to be suspicious if we want to be, and we're not pressured to not be suspicious for
Yeah,
productivity.
again, we're people. Let's let people work at a people's pace and not at a machine's pace and not at a production pace and not at a productivity and a numbers pace. And I think that's really one of the biggest things with security is if you force people to perform in a sense where they can't take that time to check themselves, to think about things, to let it process in the human brain and rattle around because we all process things differently in different amounts of time, then we're not going to get anywhere. And so that's a hugely important point, Thea, and thank you for raising that. And Scott, I'll give you the last point on this before we take the next step forward.
Yeah, I think just a couple of the points that were covered here, I wanted to just dig into a little bit. The question of when did I first start to realize that these deep fake things were real? In my own experience, and it's funny. I go on YouTube quite often just to wind down and catch news and other things. And one of the things I'm interested in, Fletus will use this as OPSEC against me at some point, is I like to watch video recreations of airline incidents and things like that. And sometimes it's just maybe a headline that claims to be a news story about some near miss, and you actually see video and you think, is that real or not, right? And it's taken a while, but you start to get really skeptical of everything now. And
Yeah.
I think that means, as Shelley said sometime in the chat, sometimes we're overwhelmed by all this stuff that happens and all the misinformation that we're starting to be sent all the time, to a point where I think we're really going to start to struggle to trust anything online, especially from media outlets and even online audio, radio, or podcasts, right? I mean, everything that we listen to or consume, we now have to think, how was that created, as Bec said. So that's my observation.
Yeah, and it just kind of struck me too. We have to remember we've just went through the biggest deep fake phase of the year, and that's the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl commercials for years have been priming us around getting used to deepfakes and almost accepting anything you see as reality. They've been using special effects, and the ad industry for years has been kind of a leader in making us think, well, it's okay that someone's also on the moon drinking a Pepsi, right? So part of these, now when we look at commercials and stuff, it's completely different. And now that this is translating into recreating real people and politicians, and going down the road of even affecting the outcome of campaigns and elections, I mean, we really have to start to pay attention. But at what point do we overpay attention, right? And how do you turn on the TV and then just enjoy it versus critically watching every ad and commercial and even news story and being like, is this real or legitimate? It's a scary time to try and navigate through. So speaking of, though,
So one thing real quick while you're transitioning
yeah.
to what George and you were just saying. So with the Super Bowl, if you watch the Super Bowl halftime show, you notice that Alicia Keys hit a wrong note like immediately when she started. But if you go watch it right now on YouTube, it's been cleaned up, but they do not tell you it's been cleaned up. So what we watched live is not what's actually was recorded and disseminated for people to rewatch.
Yeah.
And
So history is actually being changed, right?
Yeah.
Because we would then, like, for our historic moment, we would go to the recording.
Yep.
But that is not an accurate capture anymore of what actually happened.
That's the point now. You're going to have people who remember her messing up the note, and they're going to think that they dreamed it to that behavioral piece. To Thea's point, like, I saw this. Did I dream that? When the recording doesn't match it. So now you have stuff that you've experienced with your own eyes watching the TV, that's no longer going to be historically correct, because everyone else who watches it tomorrow, next year, and 3 years are going to see the perfect edit, and they're going to think it's unedited. And that's going
Yeah.
to be the scary part, is we're going to keep editing stories.
Yeah, if we don't fact check ourselves in a sense, then how are we going to, learn the difference between real and fake, and be even prepared to look for it? It's excellent points, but all of this then translates into my next question for the panel. I know we've touched on some of this, but I'd just love to see if we've got any extra thoughts on it. But how should awareness program incorporate defensive measures for employees to spot and avoid deepfakes? So now let's turn it around, like it's happening. So what can we do to stop that? Thea?
Yes, so per my earlier point, I think we should have more introduction of real life scenarios for people that they could realistically be in. And this is not that everybody needs to go through a deepfake scenario, but at least you need to put in your C-suite, and anybody connected to them needs to go through a deepfake scenario. I think that's really important. And I think the point here is, when we're talking about security awareness training, a lot of vendors have discussed the idea of humans being the last line of defense in your toolbox. And I just want to point out that in a deepfake scenario, they are your only line of defense in your toolbox, because they've got hold of a person. So security awareness training needs to focus less on necessarily the details of technology and more on how that's implemented to manipulate people. That would be my...
Yeah, it's a valid point. I even see it to the point of like tabletop exercises with real life examples, right? Let's not just theorize this. This is something that needs to be visually shown to someone, because like, you could tell me about it, but if you show me new technology of like, my favorite dead musician dancing on stage, and I go there and I see it and I believe it, and like all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is different, and that makes you see things in a different light. So I think real life examples on top of what Thea's talking about would be ideal. We'll go back next.
Yeah, just again, absolutely the real life example. I remember the first thing that I saw was some Tom Cruise doing some video. I can't even remember what it was about now. And it was just like, wow, that's amazing. Who knew that we had the technology to do this sort of thing? Didn't even look to examine it properly to see what the deep fakery was, but it was enough to catch my attention and think, oh my, how on earth have we got here? And then from that, it's been building on that up to the, what does that look like at work? What does it look like at home? How do you spot deep fakes? But even a lot of people won't have even ever seen one knowingly. So it's just, is that the first stage of awareness? Like Thea said, you've got to show people. And I think that it's always a gradual process. It's about remembering that we have to take people on the same journey that we've been on. And I think sometimes it's very easy to jump into the right, hey, you need to look for this, you need to look for that, when they've never even seen a deep fake and when perhaps even recognize one. So I think,
or fully understand what goes into it and everything else, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, George, and then Fletus.
Yeah, I think to echo some of those sentiments, deepfakes are only a link in the chain, and they are used to exploit and hack around a process. So you have to sort of fortify defenses in terms of detection, sure, but you really have to fortify process, right? So as a practical example, the attack on MGM was, if you get into the guts of it, really a weaponization of their Okta instance, right? Their IAM instance. How did they get there? Was a deepfake call to IT support desk asking for something. And so if you have outsourced your IT process and told them like, you are incentivized to turn around as many tickets as possible, and they get a hurried call like, hey, I can't get into this thing, you have created a process that can be exploited, right? And so to Thea's point about slowing down, you have to examine, I would start at your high touch areas, accounts payable, HR, IT sysadmins, the places that you feel are very sensitive in terms of either escalating privileges or access to data. But then you also you probably have to do an anthropological study of your process and figure out what could get exploited, and then take people through that in the tabletop exercise, like make them feel the pressure that their boss is like, do this tonight because I have to get this contract signed by tomorrow. Like make them feel that stress and do that to make them mindful of like, that's the feeling that's going to get exploited in that chain. It's not just like deep fake video, I get $25 million. I still have to convince you to wire that money.
You have to be a really good social engineer. You still have to do all your pretexting and your research and everything else, around it. The deep fake was just the way that you happen to get that conversation.
Yeah, but if you start fortifying your processes, it gets harder for those things to crack them.
Yeah, you made a great point off the top. Maybe not do financial transactions over Zoom that are valued in the $25 million range. Yeah. Anyone else have any last thoughts before I want to jump into our last poll here?
I'll quickly go. I dropped pretty much what I want to say in quotes. So organizations still need technical and administrative controls, but we have to educate, trust, and rely on the human. Technology is inherently neutral. We have to remind people it's neutral. It's how you use it. So it's up to us to find a way to be responsible, inclusive, sustainable, enabling, and ethical with it. And then lastly, we've talked about this a few times. Awareness is good, but without the skills and ability tied to the measure, you just have anxiety. And I don't want to put anxiety on you. Like, that's a behavioral thing. We just don't want to introduce anxiety. So to Bec and Oliver, start slow. Just have them, and to George's point, like make it take 3 people to wire money. And the CEO has to be one of them. So if the CEO is requesting it, he has to approve it, or she has to approve it. And then the person who pays it can't be the one who approves it. So CEO approves, someone else processes the payment, and then someone else has approved it. Boom, you've got an administrative checkbox. So no matter if it was from Zoom, email, phone call, you've got administrative controls that you can put technical gates on if you want to stop from the BEC of the world, the business email compromise that we kept talking about when it was email. Now we're talking about deep fakes wiring money.
Yeah. Scott, final point.
Yeah, I've really been inspired, I think, by some of the comments here, because it's true. I mean, people really need the scenarios. They need to be immersed into a situation that will help them recognize something in the real world. And I think it almost comes down to maybe this group can create a new concept that is like tabletop exercises, but in a whole different context where, we're developing amongst us, collaborating to figure out what kind of methodology could we put together that would allow CISOs and executives to explore and practice making decisions in situations where you're not sure of the authenticity of the inquiry.
Nah, it's a great point. And so kind of leading into still talking around training, just going to launch our last poll, grab the feedback here. Question is, have you received training around what a deepfake is and how to spot one? And so just curious from people in the audience, has anyone been talking to you about this yet? And curious from the panel itself, have you guys received any training, assigned to you, or have you just sought it out yourselves within your organizations? And so I always wonder, when's it going to happen?
Yeah, this is a point of great frustration for me. I've been talking to people about this since 2019, which I get was a little early, but I always get, well, we're just trying to nail the basics on email right now. And I'm like, yes, but
Yeah.
that's where you start getting into the litany. Like, I'm just like, oh, this is just one more thing to stack on top. But I think to Thea's point, if you back up, this is just a flavor of social engineering. And if you can get them around that, then, so anyway, I'm actually kind of glad about the 25 million. I feel sorry for that firm. But I feel like it's the fire that needed to get the attention of, like, this is now a thing. It's out in the wild. It's real, and it will take you for lots and lots of money.
It was so compelling and a very illustrative story. Yeah.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that happened, but like you said, it kind of needed to happen to someone. Unfortunately, they were the one that fell for it. I'm sure that wasn't the first attempt. That would be also interesting to figure out what the other attempt vectors were and where they had failed and how long this was an attempted attack. But Thea, comments on this or anything?
Yeah, so I suppose, I just basically agree with what George was saying. So I'm just going to repeat what he said. So I'm just going to stop doing it.
No worries,
Fletus. Oh, good.
Yeah, it's to George's point, and I guess what we've been talking about is don't make it the focus, make it a focus. And that's why lower versus little letter here is just put it into your flow. Like, it's just, we have to understand what context, what pretenses look like, understanding. I've used the analogy a few times, post-mortem, pre-mortem, and mortem. So help them understand this is what it looks like before, this is what it's going to look like during, this is what it's going to look like after. of many different attacks, many different vectors. So it's just starting with something as simple as just like, this is how your conscious will help you. This is that breathing exercise we've talked about. Just pause for a second, take a deep breath, sing happy birthday in your head if you have to, before you respond, just to make sure it's not emotional, that it's not rash, that it's not hurried.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment actually on that, what you just said, Fletus, because I completely agree with you. We need absolutely to introduce these things. But the thing we need to understand is, and from somebody who actively works in very large organizations, multinational organizations, huge security teams, there's 6 months to produce one training about phishing, about whatever. And they're running projects to assess the status of their security, and it's taking 3 months. If you have a 3-month project, it tells you where you were 3 months ago. Look at the pace at which this is happening now. This is something, it's a big theme that we're talking about. We're like, we need to introduce training to people. What I think the cybersecurity professionals to focus on is how to get that training out quickly, effectively, how to consult with the right people who actually know what they're talking about, and get those things out to people quickly. We can't be doing these internal training programs where we take 4 months to try and develop a training for something. Now we've got a new issue, you know. But yeah.
No,
Thanks,
great
Thea.
point. Yeah,
I'm gonna invite a guest, a special guest to speak. Dave Masson, welcome to the panel.
Hi, everybody. I've been listening to what you've been saying. I just want to pick up on something that Ryan said a few minutes ago there about the event that happened in Hong Kong. That'll be a build up to that event. And I think that's where a lot of the work and study's going to go in. They didn't just turn up there. They were ready for that. They probably tried it somewhere else. Before that video even appeared, whatever it is that you're actually looking at, there's a lot of work gone in before that. And I think that in there is where we're going to have to be. And also when it comes to technical solutions, this kind of problem, it's going to be intercepting before the arrival. I watched a very interesting panel debate. It was in Europe a couple of weeks ago. It's available on the internet. And a lot of the focus was on that, this whole build-up sort of thing that goes on before then. And in there is where you've probably got a better chance when it comes to actually the technical solutions to this. Because as one of the panelists pointed out, if you have 100 people and you show them a deep fake lie, whatever it is, 80 of them will believe it. And even after that, if you then show and actually explain in depth why the entire thing was fake, only 3 people will change their mind. I.e., once you do the harm stays. So you got to get in before the damn thing actually lands on the screen. First mover advantage, obviously. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. Thank you very much for sharing that. It is, where is the technology to intercept that? And from a technical point of view, you know, what can you analyze from the bandwidth, the packets that would give you the insight that maybe something, you know, is happening that shouldn't be? And I know there's likely an answer, and there's probably people working pretty hard on that. But it would be interesting to see, you know, where technology takes us to combat this particular problem in security, like it does many times over. Any other final comments from the panel? I just want to jump in and review our poll results
for a second. It's a great theory, but would never work. So every edit would change the hash. So you'd have to know that the video hasn't been tampered by compression technology, such as your VLC, Windows player. There's a lot of stuff that would come into play that would keep that from being a true inspection mechanism of hashing and embedding code. The embedded code may work because I can look for strings, I can look for type of bits and bytes that are malicious, but how am I supposed to know that? So someone's going to have to help me train on how to look at video inspection. And even then, half the time it's coming through UDP, or 90% of the time, because you don't want a TCP connection, I'm not going to see the entire stream to be able to do that. I'd have to download it and then
analyze it.
Tricky, great in theory, but I think it would be very hard for a piece of equipment to actually do the hashing and embedded code analysis because it's streamed.
Well, if you have some time this weekend, Fletus, I challenge you to just whip that up for me, and we'll chat on Monday.
Sounds good. I'll get right. I'll have my AI and my deepfake work on that. Okay.
Appreciate it. Yeah, there's only about 3 or 4 of you running around the internet right now, right? So we can spare a couple of you. Okay, just let me share my screen. Just want to go through the poll results as we're quickly running out of time, but I always like to make sure we share them with you. First question was, have you ever encountered a deepfake online? 50% of you said more than once. So that's actually kind of surprising, but I guess, from a security perspective, maybe we are more open and to available to see it. It'd be very interesting to ask kind of general population, general public, and see where those numbers fall. Next up, we asked, do you consider the authenticity and credibility of the online content you consume and share? 90% of you, so almost everyone. So there's still 10% of the people that are just, nah, I'm good. Like, it is what it is. And the third question we asked, have you received training around what a deep fake is and how to spot or prevent one? And not shockingly, 77% of you said no. I'm not too surprised. And so, that will lead me into the paid ad part of today's forum. And that's to talk about ClickArmor. And that's who's sponsoring and bringing this event to you guys every 2 weeks. So thank you for Scott, for your time and efforts, and then for everyone in joining us. If anyone is interested in learning more about ClickArmor and how our interactive and gamified learning tool can help you and your organization, feel free to reach out to us. We're immersive, interactive, and gamified, and this is what we do. We specialize in bringing real world scenarios to your people to give them the context and the understanding they need to be more prepared to fight these cyber crimes. So that all being said, I'd like to just grab some final thoughts from the panel about any of your top insights today, takeaways, number one thing, what should everyone just run back to their teams and scream or cut and paste into Slack. Scott, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Actually, it's amazing when I don't have to host this stuff. I can actually think about what we're talking about, and just so many great insights from today's session. I think on the executive level, as Fletus mentioned, having executives trained on verification techniques with their admins and things like that. And Thea saying we need to set expectations with the executives that they have to allocate more time based on just the productivity decrease from all these kinds of attacks and the time it's going to take people to actually respond properly without causing a breach of some kind. And then George talking about focusing on fortifying the processes, right? Rather than just focusing on the attack vector, focus on, it's almost like the old firewall rules, what was it? Deny all and then allow only the things that you really want to have. So, did I miss any? I mean, there's tons of other from Bec, of course, checking where information is coming from, and the idea that we have this cognitive bias, that we're overconfident about how we're able to detect these things. Just lots of amazing insights. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, awesome. Thea?
Oh, yeah. So just quickly, I just wanted, there was something that we were going to talk about, but we didn't, but I did think about it a little bit. And that was like, what advice would you give after you've had a deep fake attack at your deployment? And one of the things that I thought that people maybe don't think about is that I imagine, just Bec, correct me if I'm wrong, but just based on my understanding of psychology, once this incident has happened and people know that it's come from a deep fake, that is going to produce chaos in your communication within your organization, because people are not going to know what's real and what isn't. So I think rather than trying to spend all of your energy in avoiding getting tricked by a deepfake, we also need to put a lot of energy into building resilience to what happens when and if that does actually happen.
Yeah. And I think that tabletop exercise, that real life scenario of it happening and bringing people into the room and letting the emotions happen, I think is almost a healthy thing to get that out of the way. So when it does happen in real life, it's not so much of an impactful event. It's more of we prepared for this. It's unfortunate, but we can move on.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely.
That's important, I think, in terms of building resilience, because let's face it, who wants to be the one that fell for it? The feelings of shame and all of that sort of thing. We can't forget about that.
No.
Because that stays with people and can cause a lot of damage, and that damage also causes ripples throughout the organisation. So I think that having those sort of tabletops and a culture that says, actually, do you know what, it's okay, in a way, because we can all fall for it. This is not an abnormal thing. There is nothing to do with you personally. So I think it just sort of, again, it's about moving that culture away from the blame. It's the human is the weak and strong, the weakness, the weak link in the loop, to being, again, the only line of defence. And I think finally for me, the other thing that I thought very much was, again, based on something Thea said about this being social engineering. A lot of the things we've talked about today, the same principles that we would talk about into general cybersecurity awareness training, awareness being relevant, needing scenarios, needing to be immersed. The thing that stuck out for me as being different is about allowing people time. And that's something that I don't think that we've given, the industry in general gives enough credence to, and especially difficult in times where everybody's up against it financially. Things are not easy out there for everybody, so time is not always
Yeah. And as you mentioned too, we can't add anxiety. There's enough of that in day-to-day life. So it's, and those are things that people just don't have. They don't have a lot of resiliency. They don't have a lot of capacity outside of work, and work is demanding enough. And then these mistakes happen because, again, then we're forced into what Fletus made a great point. We get into more of a system, and you're trying to, and then we're trying to hit goals, and, we're rewarding, what George was saying, like if you build a process, but that process is flawed, you're going to drive everyone, through the meat grinder, so to speak. Like we're just setting people up to fail. And so if we kind of take a step back and build out our training programs and give space and give time, I mean, I think we can combat this. But if we just go full speed ahead, I don't think we're going to get any further ahead. George?
Yeah, I just say start talking about it now. Start talking about it with empathy, sympathy, study your processes, and know if you're running a security awareness program, this is a multidisciplinary effort. This is different than links, right? What we see, this evolution is 150,000 years old, and this hardware has no patching schedule. So we have to recognize that this is fundamentally different than what we've been trained for the last 25 years.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, what's this going to do to phishing simulation vendors? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they'll always need to be there, I guess, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, 2:00 on the nose, guys. We did it. Fantastic hour. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Don't forget to share the next session screen.
Oh, yeah.
Ryan.
Sorry. Yeah, we got a next session coming up. So don't forget to join us in 2 weeks. There it is. There's a QR code again. If you trust it, scan it. See us in 2 weeks. We're going to talk about where cyber and physical security collide. So we're all moving back to the office now. It's been a little different over the last couple of years, and there are things in the physical security world we should pay attention to. So we'll have some special guests on the panel. We'll have some regulars back, and we'll appreciate you guys if you can show up and like us and support us and all those fun things. So have a great week, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and take care.